Hello, my name's Elizabeth Baker. I'm a storyteller. My story today is about a young boy who worked down under the ground quite a long time ago. I don't know about you, but I've never worked under the ground. So today we're going to need to use our imaginations. I want you to imagine yourself in the story. Try and imagine what it must have felt like to be in the dark under the ground. So, make yourselves comfortable and get ready for a tale to take you away. Billy had finished school. No more Miss Wilson telling him what to do. No more reciting his times tables. No more Miss Wilson standing him in the corner because he was daydreaming again. Billy was free. He was 14 years old and now it was time to be a man. Billy couldn't wait. His dad had come home from the mine and said he had good news. He'd spoken to the foreman and there was a job for Billy as a trapper boy. Billy didn't know what a trapper boy was, but he couldn't wait to start. "You'll have to be up at 5 with me tomorrow," he said, "so get a good night's sleep." The problem was Billy couldn't sleep. He wasn't sure if he was nervous or excited, but he tossed and turned all night, and it felt like he'd only just gone to sleep when his dad woke him. "Time to get up, lad. We're leaving soon. Your mum's putting your bait up." Billy went downstairs and his mum gave him his bait tin, and she smiled at him and said, "Work hard. Try and concentrate, there's a good lad." And then Billy and his dad were out the door. The light was just coming up. It was just starting to show in the sky, and Billy and his dad walked down through the village towards the mine. Their boots were ringing on the cobbles. Billy's dad looked at him and said, "You'll need to concentrate down there. You'll need to work hard and keep your wits about you. None of that daydreaming you like to do." Billy nodded his head and pulled his jacket up. When they got to the mine, Billy's dad took him over to some lads who looked a bit older than him, and they explained that Billy was going to be a trappy lad. It didn't sound too hard, and Billy couldn't wait actually until they started to go underground. Billy wasn't sure what he'd expected, but he hadn't expected this. He knew his dad worked underground. He knew roughly what his dad did, but his dad never really talked about it when he came home, and Billy could see why. It was so dark down there. They made their way along with lanterns, and then they came to a huge door, and one of the lads nodded at Billy and said, "This is your trap door. Sit there on that box and wait." And he handed Billy a lantern. Billy wasn't sure what he thought a trapdoor was going to look like, but this was big, higher than Billy, and it looked like it might be quite heavy to open and close. Billy had so many questions, but they all left him all alone, and he didn't have a chance to ask anything, and so he sat down on the box and held his lantern. And it was dark. Really, really dark. Now, Billy wasn't afraid of the dark, but he'd never been in dark like this before. It felt like it was closing in on him, almost like he couldn't breathe, and as he looked at the walls, he was sure he could see faces. The props creaked, and he could hear the men working further in, and he sat and waited, and soon there was a rumbling noise, and as he held his lantern up, he could see a lad coming towards him, holding a lantern too, and he was leading a horse. The horse was pulling tubs filled with huge pieces of rock. Billy leapt up to open the door. He was so keen to get it right, and he tripped over the rail and fell flat on his face, and he picked himself up, and the lad looked at him and said, "You'll need to be more careful. We've lost lads like you down here through not concentrating." Billy nodded and he opened the door, and he touched his lip and he could feel the blood and he could taste it too. Billy spent the rest of the shift opening and closing that trapdoor, being a trappy lad. It felt endless, that shift. He wasn't sure of the time down there in the dark. All he knew was that he must stay awake and he must stop looking for faces in the rocks. When he got home that night, he was so tired he could barely eat his tea, and he crawled into bed. He was absolutely exhausted. By the end of the week, he'd got used to the routine, but it didn't mean he wasn't absolutely shattered. In fact, so shattered that he did the one thing he wasn't supposed to do. He fell asleep on his box. He woke with a start, with a clip round the ear from one of the horse lads, and a warning again about being awake and keeping his wits about him. And for the rest of the shift, Billy sat and squeezed his fingers and his hands together, trying to stay awake. He wasn't sure what he'd expected when he came to work down the mine, but it wasn't this. He'd been so ready to leave school. He couldn't wait. And now he'd give anything to be back there. Even doing Miss Wilson's times tables. Even being stood in the corner with a dunce's hat on for daydreaming. He thought about the other kids still in school, the younger ones, and he thought back to how he would run round the playground with a football with the other lads, feeling the sun on his face. And then he thought about how he and his mates would walk down the back lane near their village, and how the swifts would swoop and soar in the sky. And for a minute, Billy felt like he could almost feel the wind on his face. Being down the mine, well, it was a horrid place for a 14-year-old lad. No lad should be down there. But Billy discovered that if he used his imagination, well, he could be anywhere. And that's how Billy survived. He worked hard, but when he was waiting, when he was sitting in the dark, Billy did what Billy did best. He daydreamed. And in his imagination, he was outside, he was at school, he wasn't in a deep, dark mine. Billy discovered that with imagination, you can take yourself even out of the worst places.